A dark romance series. The Monster Who Owned Me. Part 9. The Inheritance. Every ending carries inside it the seed of the thing that comes after. The question is never what was left. The question is what you choose to do with what remains in your hands. Chapter 1. The Call. Violet, London, Monday noon. For a long moment after Nora finished speaking, I said nothing. The phone was warm in my hand. Through the fifth-floor window of the Notting Hill flat, the London street was going about its Monday business with the determined ordinariness of a city that does not stop for anything. Delivery vans. A woman walking a dog the size of a small horse. A man in a suit moving very fast in the direction of somewhere important. All of it perfectly indifferent to the fact that Nora Ellis had just said 5 sentences that had reorganized the story I thought I was living. "Violet," Nora said, into the silence. Her voice had the quality she reserved for situations requiring both professionalism and care simultaneously. The quality of someone who has decided that this particular circumstance requires both. "Are you still there?" "I'm here," I said. "I'm thinking." "Of course," she said. The acknowledgement of someone who understood what thinking looked like from the outside and was prepared to wait for it. Richard Cresswell was dead. This was the first thing. The man who had spent 15 years obstructing Adrian's attempt to preserve his mother's building. The man who had sent a photograph to my Brooklyn apartment with 8 words of warning on the back. The man whose legal machinery had been the primary obstacle between the crest and everything Adrian had tried to do for it. Dead this morning of natural causes. His estate was contesting the crest transfer. This was the second thing. The settlement Adrian had reached with Cresswell personally, the agreement that had transferred the property to the Preservation Trust, had been reached before any formal legal documentation had been completed. The signing had happened in stages, and several of those stages were in process when Cresswell died. His estate, which meant his lawyers, which meant the people who stood to inherit from his portfolio, and who had a financial interest in contesting any recent concessions he had made, was now arguing that the transfer was incomplete. And the will, that was the third thing, the thing that sat in my chest with a weight I was still trying to understand. Richard Cresswell's will named Adrian as a beneficiary, a significant one. I turned this over and looked at all its sides the way I turned over materials in the studio, holding it up to the light, examining the grain, trying to understand what it was made of. A man who had spent 15 years systematically obstructing the son of a woman he had exploited. A man who had sent surveillance photographs to intimidate Adrian's partner. A man who had used a board member's access to leak a dying woman's medical records to the press. This man had left Adrian something significant in his will. "Nora," I said, "does Adrian know?" "He knows about the death," she said. "His lawyer called him en route to the airport. He is currently," a brief pause. "His flight landed 20 minutes ago. He is currently unreachable because he is in a car and he turned his phone off, which he does when he needs to think." I knew that, the turned-off phone when the thinking required space. "He doesn't know about the will yet." "The will information came through our legal team 30 minutes after he would have boarded," Nora said. "He does not yet know." "He's going to need," I stopped. I thought about what he was going to need. Not management, not arrangements, not the infrastructure. He's going to need time to be in it before he has to respond to it. "Yes," Nora said. "I thought you should know before he does, because when he does know, he will need you to already have processed your reaction, so that you can be present for his." I stood in the London flat with my phone and the September light coming through the window and the installation materials along the east wall and thought about what Nora had just said. The specific intelligence of it, the specific care. "Thank you," I said, "for calling me first." "Of course," she said, and then, after a pause that was not quite professional, "How are you?" It was such a simple question, from a woman who did not ask simple questions without meaning them. "I'm processing," I said. "I'll be all right." "Good," she said. "Call me when you've spoken with him." She ended the call. I set the phone down on the kitchen table, and stood for a moment with my hands flat on the surface. His gesture, I realized. The hands flat on the table gesture of someone who needs to feel that they are physically here while they process something large. I had learned it from watching him and was now doing it myself, which felt like a small, intimate, slightly alarming piece of evidence about how thoroughly we had absorbed each other. I thought, Richard Cresswell is dead. I thought, the story Adrian has been living for 15 years just changed shape in a way neither of us expected. I thought, the crest is at risk again. I thought, he is in a car with his phone off and he does not yet know. I went to the window. The London street was still going about its business. The dog woman had been replaced by a different dog and a different woman, which was the nature of streets. I thought about what Nora had said. He will need you to already have processed your reaction so that you can be present for his. I thought, that is correct. That is exactly correct. I stood at the window and processed. I gave myself 20 minutes, the deliberate, methodical working through of the thing, examining each layer, understanding what I felt and why I felt it, arriving at something that was not resolution but was at least orientation. Then I sat down at the kitchen table and waited for his call. It came 40 minutes later. You know, he said, not a question. Nora called, I said. A pause, the specific pause of someone who has just received confirmation of something they suspected. She called you first. Yes. Another pause. I could hear something in the quality of his silence, the particular register that I had learned to identify as the controlled version of something that was not controlled underneath. Not panic. Not grief, exactly. Something more complicated, the specific emotional weather of a person whose nemesis has just died and left them something, which is not a straightforward emotional experience. Are you all right? I asked. A long pause, longer than his usual calibrated pauses. I don't know yet, he said. The honest answer. The non-performing answer. The answer that a year ago he would have replaced with a version of I'm fine, because I don't know yet was too much exposure. That's the right answer, I said. It doesn't feel right, he said. It feels like a malfunction. It's not a malfunction, I said. It's the appropriate response to something that doesn't fit any existing category. Give it time to find its shape. He was quiet for a moment. The will, he said. I know. I don't understand it, he said. I have spent, he stopped, started again. I spent 15 years understanding that man as a specific kind of obstacle, a specific kind of harm. The will doesn't fit that understanding. No, I said, it doesn't. Why would he? Another stop. The question he hadn't yet formed because the answer hadn't presented itself. I think, I said carefully, that you are going to have to sit with not knowing that for a while. And that sitting with not knowing it is going to be very uncomfortable for you specifically. A silence, then quietly, yes. The crest, I said. The estate contesting the transfer, that's the immediate thing. I know, my lawyers are on it. The documentation is strong. The transfer was substantially complete before he died. The estate's position is legally weak. But it will take time. A pause. More time. More time, I said. After 15 years, more time is not the problem. A brief sound that was not quite a laugh but was adjacent to it. No, he said. More time is not the problem. Adrian. Yes. Come back. The words came out before I'd finished deciding to say them. Not impulsively, the decision was there, complete, just faster than the usual deliberation. The London work can wait 2 days. Come back and be in this with me, not over the phone. A pause so long, I thought the connection had dropped. You just asked me to disrupt my schedule because you want me physically present, he said. Yes, I said. You're sure? I'm sure. Another pause. I'll be on the next flight, he said. Chapter 2. The shape of grief without a name. Violet that evening. He arrived at 8:30 in the evening, which meant he'd taken a late afternoon flight without stopping at home first. Coming directly from Heathrow, in the same travel coat he'd left in that morning. He came in and I didn't say anything and he didn't say anything. I had learned, over the months of knowing him, that the things that were too large for immediate language required a different kind of reception, not questions, not performance, just presence. The way you receive weather, you don't interrogate it, you stand in it. I made tea. He sat at the kitchen table and watched me make it with the quality of attention he gave things when his mind was somewhere else. The attention of the eyes without the attention of the thought, the body here while the interior worked something out. I set the tea in front of him and sat across from him. We were quiet for a while. The London night outside the window. The flat's particular sounds, the building settling, the street below, the distant traffic that is the constant ground bass of a city of 9 million. "Tell me what you're feeling," I said. Not a command, an invitation. The specific invitation of someone who has decided that the other person should not be alone with what they're carrying. He looked at the tea. "I'm not sure I have the vocabulary for it." "Try." A long pause. He turned the cup in his hands, his version of the processing gesture, the physical occupation while the interior worked. "Relief," he said finally. "Which feels wrong, he's dead. Relief seems wrong." "It doesn't," I said. "He was an obstacle. He harmed your mother. He spent 15 years making your life harder. Relief is an honest response." "Yes," he said, and then underneath the relief, he stopped. "What?" "Something that isn't quite grief, but is in that vicinity," he said slowly, working it out as he spoke. "Which makes no sense. He was not someone I." "He was the organizing principle of your life for 15 years, I said. "Not the person you loved, but the force you were building against, the opposition that gave the effort its shape." I paused. "When that's gone, even when it's removed by a good event, even when the ending of it is relief, there's still something that has to reorganize itself, something that has lost its load-bearing wall." He looked at me, the full attention, the recognition of something landing correctly. "The structure changes," he said. "The structure changes," I said. "That's not grief for him. That's grief for the version of yourself that was organized around him, the version that knew what it was building toward and why." He was very still, looking at me in the way that meant the thing had gone somewhere real, somewhere below the managed surface into the actual interior. "I've been thinking about what comes after," he said. "For months, since the installation, since the crest transfer. I know what I'm going to build next. I have ideas, projects, the company has directions. But he paused. The emotional architecture of what came next. I didn't know what that looked like without the 15-year purpose shaping it." "And now?" I asked. He looked at me across the kitchen table in the London flat. At the sketchbooks, the material samples, the red hook glass on the windowsill catching the lamplight. At me. "Now it looks like this," he said. "Exactly this. You in London making something extraordinary. Me coming back because you asked me to. The crest in a preservation trust that will outlast both of us. Alina painting. Nora calling you first because she understands the order of importance." He said it simply, not as a declaration, as an observation. The observation of someone who has looked at the shape of his life and recognized it as the right shape. "That's the structure," I said. "Yes," he said, "that's the structure." We drank our tea. The night was quiet outside. At some point, I moved from my chair to his side of the table and sat beside him rather than across from him, which was a small thing and also not a small thing, and he put his arm around me without ceremony, and we stayed like that for a long time. Not talking about the will, not talking about the estate contest, not talking about what Cresswell had meant to leave him or why. Just being in the same room, the same space, the same story. That was enough for tonight. Tomorrow there would be lawyers and questions and the legal machinery of an estate in motion. Tonight there was tea and a kitchen table and two people who had chosen each other, making the same quiet decision again. He stayed for 4 days. In those 4 days he worked from the flat, the calls and the correspondence, and the company running itself through the infrastructure he'd built specifically so it could function without his constant presence. He worked efficiently, in the mornings, with the professional competence that was so habitual it required no effort. And then the rest of the time he was simply here. Present in the way he'd been learning to be present. Not managing, not arranging. Sitting on the kitchen counter while I worked and asking questions about the installation materials. Walking with me to the museum in the afternoons. Reading in the chair in the corner of the studio space while I made notes on the ceiling geometry problem. The particular, unhurried presence of someone who has no agenda except being in the same space. On the second day, he received the formal communication from Cresswell's estate lawyers. He read it in the kitchen with the controlled expression, then handed his phone to me without being asked. I read it. The bequest was specific, not a general financial inheritance, though there was that too, a number that I absorbed without reacting to because the number was the least interesting thing about it. What Cresswell had left to Adrian was a collection of documents. Legal documents, property records, correspondence spanning 40 years. The documents relating to Marguerite, Kane's professional relationship with Richard Cresswell. All of them, including the ones Cresswell had spent 15 years making sure Adrian couldn't access through legal channels. I set the phone down. He left you the evidence, I said. He left me the full record, Adrian said. His voice was very even, the thermostat voice. The voice he used when the thing underneath was too large for the register. Why, I said, not a question exactly, more the word itself placed in the air between us turning. I've been thinking about that since yesterday, he said. The only conclusion I can reach is that he wanted, at some point, he decided that the record should exist fully. Not in the partial version that I had assembled from what I could access. The complete version, with his own correspondence, his own acknowledgement of what he did. A deathbed conscience, I said. Something like it. Or, he paused, or the decision that a man who has done a specific wrong should not die as the only person who fully understands the extent of it. That the record, complete, should exist in the hands of the person most entitled to it. I thought about this, about the specific moral complexity of a man who had done real harm and spent decades defending that harm, arriving at the end of his life and deciding that the person he had harmed most deserved the full truth. Not as an apology, not as a gesture of reconciliation, as a record. It doesn't undo it, I said. No, he said, it doesn't. But it's something. It's something, he agreed. I haven't decided yet what to do with it. The documentation I already have is sufficient for the public record. This is additional, more complete. I need time to sit with what it means before I decide how to use it. You have time, I said. The estate contest will take months. You don't need to decide today. He nodded. He looked at the window, the London view, the rooftops, the different sky. I spent so many years, he said slowly, building against him, defining myself in opposition to what he'd done. And now he's gone and he left me the full record and I have. He stopped. Everything you needed, I said. Everything I needed, he said, and no one left to be in opposition to. That's not nothing, I said. That emptiness, that's actually the space where the next thing goes. He turned to look at me. What do you put in a space like that? I thought about it, about salvage, about what you do with the space left by demolition, not fill it with something equivalent, not try to replace the thing that was there. Let the new thing be what it is, shaped by the space but not determined by it. Whatever you want, I said. That's the point. For the first time in 15 years, whatever you want. He sat with that. The kitchen was quiet. The afternoon light was doing the London afternoon thing, longer than New York's at this latitude, the light staying later, the summer not yet ready to let go. I want the crest to be restored, he said finally, properly. I want the architect to have everything she needs to do it right. I want it to be open to the public, not a museum, a living building, the way it was designed to be. The kind of place people live and work in. Good, I said. I want the installation to be the beginning of something, not just the Kane Tower atrium, a practice, a way of working with salvage and memory in buildings, in cities, a foundation that can fund that work in places that can't fund it themselves. I stopped. The shape of it was already clear in my mind, the scope, the possibility, the specific kind of thing that could exist at the intersection of his resources and my practice. That's the next thing. Yes, he said, I think so. You should build it, I said. We should build it. He looked at me, the something enormous, the full measure. Yes, he said, we should. Chapter 3. What Nora does next. Nora, New York, the same week. She received the news of Cresswell's death on Monday morning and filed it in the appropriate category in her professional intelligence. Significant, requiring response, with implications that would unfold over days and weeks rather than requiring immediate action. By noon, she had spoken to the legal team, reviewed the estate contest documentation, and formed a preliminary assessment of the legal position that was, as she communicated to the lawyers, strong. The transfer documentation was substantially complete. The estate's challenge was a nuisance, not a threat. It would take time and resources, but it would not succeed. She called Violet. She had been thinking about whether to call Violet for 20 minutes before she made the call, which was unusual for her. She was not, by nature or by practice, an indecisive person. The deliberation was not about whether to call, but about what calling represented. A decision about order of priority, a statement about who in Adrian Kane's life was, at this moment, most important to his well-being. She called Violet. After the call, she stood at her office window and looked at the city and thought about the past 8 years and everything that had changed and everything that hadn't. What hadn't changed, her competence, her discretion, her understanding of the building and the people in it, her ability to anticipate the next requirement before it was stated. What had changed? The nature of the requirements. For 7 years, Adrian Kane's requirements had been professional, strategic, occasionally personal in the way that a powerful man's requirements sometimes became personal. Alina's situation, the Crest documentation, the specific needs of someone who kept everything to himself and required assistance in managing the things that couldn't be kept to himself. She had been the person who managed the complexity of his privacy, who understood what needed to be protected and why, who could be trusted with the information that other people couldn't be trusted with. Now there was Violet, and the requirements had shifted. The Violet requirements were different. They were not the requirements of someone managing a man's privacy and complexity from the outside. They were the requirements of someone inside, someone who knew the full picture and was choosing, with full information, to be in it. The support that Violet needed was not management. It was witnessing, being known, having the people around her understand who she was and what she was doing and trust her with the things she'd earned the right to be trusted with. Nora had decided, sometime in the autumn of the previous year, that she trusted Violet Hayes. Not because Violet had earned it in the conventional sense, through competence or reliability or the professional markers that Nora typically used to assess trustworthiness, but because Violet had done something that Nora had not, in 8 years, seen anyone do in proximity to Adrian Kane. She had pushed back, every time and stayed, every time, and the combination of those two things, the honest friction and the consistent presence, was the specific combination that Nora understood as integrity. So she had left the folder open. She had made the call this morning. She had arranged the conditions for things that needed to find their own way to the surface. She turned from the window. There was work to do. The estate contest, the will documentation, the preservation trust's legal standing in the contest, the foundation concept that Adrian had mentioned to her 2 months ago and that she had been quietly preparing infrastructure for ever since, because she was Nora Ellis and she anticipated requirements. She sat down. She opened her legal pad. She began to write. 3 days after the Cresswell news, Alina called. This was unusual enough that Nora answered with the specific alertness she reserved for unusual things. Is he all right? Alina asked. No preamble. Alina Vasic did not do preamble. He is in London, Nora said, with Violet. A pause. She asked him to come back. Yes. Another pause, the specific silence of someone receiving confirmation of something they'd hoped for. Good, Alina said. Yes, Nora said. The will, Alina said. I heard about the documents, the full record. How did you? Nora began. He called me last night, Alina said. From London. He calls me when things are large, you know this. Nora did know this. The calls from the car, the calls from hotel rooms in other cities, the calls that came late at night when the building was quiet, and he needed to say something to someone who would understand it without requiring explanation. She had facilitated those calls without ever being in them, routing them through the systems that protected Alina's location and privacy. What did he say? Nora asked. She did not normally ask this question. She asked it now because the answer felt important. He said, Alina began slowly, that he didn't know what to do with having everything he'd needed for 15 years. That it felt, anticlimactic was not the right word. That it felt like the end of a sentence that had been so long he'd forgotten what the sentence was about. Nora was quiet for a moment. What did you tell him? I told him to read the documents, Alina said. All of them, not for strategy or evidence or legal positioning, just to know. To have the full picture of what happened to his mother in her own professional record, in her own correspondence. To let himself know it and grieve it properly, instead of organizing it into a legal case. That's good advice, Nora said. He said Violet had said something similar, Alina said, that the empty space was where the next thing went. A pause. I like her very much, Nora. I know, Nora said. She is going to be here for a long time. Yes, Nora said. I believe she is. Good, Alina said. He has needed her specifically for a very long time, even before he knew it. After the call, Nora sat for a moment in the particular stillness of someone who has received confirmation of something they already understood and is letting the confirmation settle. She thought 8 years. 8 years of this building and the things it contains and the people it has been home to. She thought, and now a foundation, and the crest restored, and Alina painting, and Violet in London making the next thing. She thought, this is what it looks like when a story is going right. She opened the foundation infrastructure documents she'd been preparing. She began to work. Chapter 4. The documents. Adrian, London, Wednesday evening. He read the documents on Wednesday evening, alone in the library of the Notting Hill flat, while Violet was at the museum for a late consultation with the architect. She had suggested it, not pushed, suggested. When you're ready, she'd said. Not as strategy, just to know. And he had waited until Wednesday because Wednesday felt like the right distance from Monday's news, enough time to be ready, not so much time that the waiting became avoidance. Cresswell's lawyers had transmitted the digital files. He had them in a secure folder on his laptop, the 40-year record of Richard Cresswell's professional and personal relationship with Marguerite Kane. He opened the oldest file first. The first documents were from before he was born. Correspondence between Cresswell and his mother when she was 27, and he was a promising architect just beginning to build her practice, and he was 40 and already established and interested in funding interesting work. The early letters were professional, the language of a patron and an artist, the specific careful formality of two people in a new professional relationship who are feeling out the terms. His mother's letters were like her designs. Direct, precise, with a quality of attention to the right word that he recognized, and that made something tight in his chest that he breathed through and kept reading. The shift happened 2 years in. Not dramatically, that was the thing about reading it as a record rather than a story. In a story, there would be a moment, a turning point. In the record, it was a gradual change in register, the professional warmth becoming something warmer, then something more complicated. Then, he read the letters on both sides and understood what they showed, and he breathed through the tight thing again and kept reading. His mother had ended the personal relationship when he was 3 years old. He found this in a letter she'd written, formal, clear, the language of someone who had made a decision and was communicating it precisely. She had cited the power imbalance, the way the professional relationship made the personal relationship untenable, the need to separate the funding from the person. Cresswell's response was not in the file. But the record of what followed was the shift in the professional relationship, the funding that became conditional, the introductions that stopped happening, the projects that encountered unexpected obstacles. All of it in the documents, the pattern visible now that he had the full record instead of the fragments he'd assembled over 15 years. He read for 2 hours. At some point, he became aware that he was crying. Not dramatically, the way men cry when they've been not crying for a long time and the body has decided, without consulting the mind, that now is the time. Quietly, the tears on his face before he'd fully understood they were there. He did not stop reading. He read the full record. The last document was dated 6 months before his mother's death. A letter from her to a colleague, a copy of which had apparently ended up in Cresswell's files, perhaps kept by Cresswell, perhaps sent to him, the circumstance unclear. The letter described the crest, which was then under construction, with the specific tender precision of someone writing about something they love. The light in the main room at 3 in the afternoon is the best light I have ever designed for, she had written. It is the light I have been trying to understand my entire career. I think I finally have it right. I think this building is my best work, and I think it will outlast me in the way that the best work always does. He sat with that sentence for a long time. She had known the crest was the best thing she'd made. She had known it would outlast her. She had been right on both counts. He closed the laptop. He sat in the quiet of the library in the flat where Violet had been working for 6 weeks, surrounded by her sketchbooks and her material samples, and the particular creative density of a space occupied by someone who was making something important, and he thought about his mother. Not the 15-year project of her, not the documentation or the legal case or the public record. Her, the person who had been 27 once and had written letters with the quality of someone who paid attention to the right word, who had designed buildings as love letters, who had thought the light in the main room was the best light she'd ever created, who had known at the end of her life that her best work would outlast her. He thought, it has. He thought, it is in the atrium of my building, and it will be there as long as the building stands. He thought, you were right. It outlasted you. It outlasted Cresswell. It will outlast me. He heard the flat's door, Violet's key in the lock, the particular sound of her returning, the bag set down, the coat on the hook, the pause in the entryway that meant she was assessing the quality of the flat's silence before she proceeded into it. She came to the library door. She looked at him, the whole inventory, the reading of what was on his face. She didn't ask if he was all right. She understood that the question was its own kind of pressure. She came and sat beside him, close, her shoulder against his. Tell me about her, she said. Not the case, not the documents, her. He was quiet for a moment. Then he started talking. He talked for a long time. About the specific things, the way she'd moved through buildings she was designing, the food she'd always burned because she forgot about it when she was thinking about something, the drawing she'd kept on her desk of a building she'd designed at 22 and never built, the specific laugh that he'd inherited in some form because Violet had told him once that his laugh reminded her of something she couldn't identify, and he had understood, hearing it described, that it was his mother's. Violet listened. She did not try to reframe or comfort or find the silver lining. She listened with the full attention she brought to everything that mattered, and the room held the conversation, and somewhere in the middle of it, the grief that had not had the right container for 15 years found the right container. He talked until midnight. Then they slept, in the small bed in the London flat, in the ordinary proximity of 2 people who have chosen each other completely. In the morning, the documents were still on his laptop. The legal case was still in process. The foundation concept was still waiting to be built. All of that was still there. But something had shifted in the night, the specific shift of a thing that has been held in the wrong position for too long and has been gently, carefully, returned to the right one. He woke before her. He lay in the early London light and listened to the city starting its day and thought, she's right. The empty space is where the next thing goes. He thought, I know what I want to build. Chapter 5. September in New York. Violet, 3 months later. I came home from London on a Thursday in September. The installation at the South Kensington Museum was complete. Not the formal opening, which was scheduled for November, but the physical completion, the moment when the last element was in its position, and the space began to do what it was supposed to do, the specific quality of light through the layered materials, the competing axes held in the conversation I designed for them. It was the best work I'd ever made. I thought this standing in the museum atrium alone at 7 in the morning, the day after the fabrication team had finished, the day before the first institutional walkthrough. The space was empty, and the light was doing what September morning light in London does: clean, direct, with the specific quality of a season transitioning, the light knowing it's going to have to work harder soon and choosing, for now, to give everything. I stood in the center of the atrium and looked up at what I'd made, and I felt the thing that happens when work has arrived at what it was trying to be. Not satisfaction exactly, something more active than satisfaction, more curious. The question that comes after, what next? I called Adrian from the museum. "It's done," I said. A pause, the specific quality of his listening, even through a phone connection, always recognizable. "Tell me." So I told him. Not the technical completion, he knew the timeline. He'd been part of every major decision in the 4 months of the London work, the visits and the calls and the specific quality of attention he'd given the project from 5 time zones. I told him what it felt like. Standing in the atrium in the early morning with the light coming through the multi-layered glass and finding all the axes simultaneously, not resolving them but holding them in relation to each other. The way a room of people holds multiple conversations at once, and the multiplicity is itself a form of meaning. He was quiet for a moment after I finished. "Come home," he said. "Thursday," I said. "I'll be home Thursday." "I'll be at the airport," he said. "You don't have to." "I know," he said. "I want to." He was at the airport. This was not the version of him I saw most often. He was in a suit, coming from something, the professional register present, but softened by the fact of where he was and why. He saw me before I saw him, which was characteristic, and he was already moving through the arrivals hall toward me when I located him, and the quality of his movement, not hurried, just direct, the focused, unhurried directness of someone moving toward a specific thing that matters, was something I had accumulated enough instances of to recognize as his specific version of "I'm glad you're here." We didn't perform the reunion. We were not performance people. He took my bag and we walked to the car and he drove, and the city came back around us as we crossed back into Manhattan. The specific skyline, the density, the particular quality of September in New York, which is the best quality of any month in any city. The light still summer warm, but the air already carrying the first edge of the fall's clarity. "Alina finished the crest painting," he said. "When?" "Tuesday. She wants us both to see it together. He paused. "She's been working on it for 5 months. She said she wasn't going to show it to either of us until you were back." I thought about the painting, the large canvas, the room with the old glass windows, the winter light that Alina had stood in and understood and was now recording. 5 months of returning to it. "Tomorrow," I said. "We'll go tomorrow." He nodded. "The foundation," I said. "Where are you?" "The structure is in place. Nora has the operational framework built. The first 3 projects are identified, 2 in New York, 1 in Detroit, buildings with significant original materials at risk." A pause. "I need your input on the artistic criteria, the guidelines for what qualifies as a salvage project versus a standard renovation." "That's a conversation," I said. "A long one." "I know," he said. "I've been saving it for when you were back." The city moved past the car windows. The familiar skyline, the familiar density, the familiar quality of New York in September going about its business with the specific energy of a city that has just remembered it, has 11 months of momentum still to expend. I was home. Not the 3 rooms in Brooklyn. Those were gone, the lease returned, the landlord's next tenant already installed. Not the wolf-stained ceiling and the Ohio luck. Home meaning the building on the corner of this street, the elevator to the 53rd floor, the library with the worn chairs, and the drawing of the crest on the wall. The studio on 18 with the floor-to-ceiling windows and the light I knew by heart. The 17th floor where Alina's canvases were accumulating and the coffee maker was always on. Home meaning this. I looked at the city through the car window and thought, I have been in this city for 5 years, and it took me 4 years of solitude and one wrong elevator button to find the right version of it. I thought, worth every day of the 4 years. I thought, the lucky stain was right. Chapter 6. The Crest Painting. Violet, Friday morning. Alina had moved the painting to the studio's east wall. It was large, larger than I'd understood from the incremental glimpses over 5 months, the corner I'd seen when it was facing the wrong direction, the covered canvas visits when she'd decided it wasn't ready to be seen. In its final position against the east wall, with the morning light on it, it was enormous in the specific way of paintings that have claimed their scale honestly. Not large for effect, large because the subject required it. We stood in front of it for a long time without speaking. She had painted the room with the floor-to-ceiling windows in winter. The specific winter afternoon light coming through the old glass, fractured, warm-toned, the specific quality of light that had been the organizing principle of my installation work, and was, I now understood from standing in front of this painting, the organizing principle of Marguerite Kane's architecture. The same light. The same understanding of what old glass did to light that was different from what new glass did. The way the imperfections bent and scattered and returned it transformed. She had painted the room empty. No furniture, no people. Just the room itself and the light in it, which was somehow more present than anything else could have been, the room in its pure state, the space its architect had intended, nothing added or taken away. In the lower right corner of the painting, barely visible in the layering of the light, a small figure, seen from behind, standing at the windows. The silhouette of a woman with the quality of presence of someone who is deeply, completely in the space she's in. I knew who it was. Beside me, I heard Adrian's breath change. He stood very still. The same stillness I'd known from the first time I saw him in the Meridian Hotel, but different now, not the controlled stillness of someone managing the surface, but the stillness of someone completely present in what they're seeing, completely here. I took his hand. He held mine without looking at me, without looking away from the painting. Alina was in her chair by the window, the way she often was when she wanted us to look at something without the pressure of her watching us look. She was doing something in her sketchbook, or performing the doing of something, with the discretion of someone who understands when to be in the background. The figure, Adrian said finally. His voice was the quiet version, the voice from the late hours. Is that? Yes, Alina said, without looking up from the sketchbook. He was quiet for another long moment. She looks, he stopped. She looks at home in it. She was at home in it, Alina said. That room was the best room she ever made. Of course she looks at home in it. The painting was witness to everything. The room, the light, the small figure, the specific quality of a space made by someone who understood that buildings were love letters. All of it held in the paint, in the record Alina had made over 5 months of return visits and patient attention. I thought about salvage, about what you do with the space left by loss, not fill it with something equivalent, not replace the thing that was there. Let the new thing be shaped by the space but be fully itself. A painting, an installation, a foundation, a life chosen in full view of everything it contains. Alina, I said. Yes. It's the best thing you've made. She looked up, the direct gaze the painter's attention. Yes, she said, it is. No false modesty, no performance, just the honest assessment of someone who has made their best work and knows it. Adrian let go of my hand and walked toward the painting. He stopped very close to it, looking at the small figure in the lower right corner, the woman at the windows. He stayed there for a long time. Alina and I didn't speak. Some silences are not for filling. When he turned back, his face was the fully open version, nothing managed, nothing withheld. He looked at Alina first, and the look between them was the look of two people who have known each other through the hardest years and arrived at the other side of something together. Then he looked at me. I looked back with everything I had. The room was full of light. The painting was on the wall. Outside the window, New York was doing its September things. Enough. More than enough. That afternoon, he asked me where I wanted to hang it. We were in the penthouse library, the library which had become, in the year since I'd first come to this floor, so thoroughly ours that I could no longer remember what it had felt like before. The drawing of the crest was on the wall. The red hook glass was on the shelf, next to the portobello stone, and 3 other pieces we'd accumulated since. A fragment of Victorian tile from a building in Detroit that was one of the Foundation's first projects. A piece of pre-war window glass from a demolished school in Baltimore. A small architectural drawing, unsigned, that I'd found at a market in Paris in August. The shelf had become what he'd said he wanted, a collection of things connected to what we are. "Where does the painting go?" he asked. I thought about it. The painting was large. It needed a wall that could hold it, a room that could be in conversation with it, a space that understood what it was. "The atrium," I said. "Not permanently, I know that's not how you'd normally." "Tell me," he said. "The atrium has the installation," I said. "The crest's materials held in the building you built, but the painting is something different. It's the crest as Alina saw it, as she understood it. The two together would be," I paused, finding it. "The installation is the building's memory. The painting is someone's memory of the building. 2 kinds of knowing in the same space, the materials and the witness." He was very still. "For the Foundation launch," he said slowly. "The opening event, the painting in the atrium beside the installation, the full record in one room." "Yes," I said. "We'd need Alina's agreement." "She'll agree," I said. "She painted it for this. She's been painting it for this." He looked at me, the enormous thing. "You know," he said, "when I engineered that wrong elevator button." "Adrian, I want to say this." "All right," I said. "When I engineered the elevator malfunction," he said, "I thought I was solving a specific problem, getting you into a specific room for a specific conversation. He paused. "I had no conception of the scale of what would follow, the crest, Alina's painting, the Foundation, the London installation." He looked at the shelf of salvaged things. "All of this, I thought I was solving a small problem. I had no idea I was beginning the best chapter of my life." The library was very quiet. "The best chapter," I said. "The best chapter," he confirmed. I looked at him, at the man who had watched my work for 4 years and built an elevator malfunction and an entire commission to reach me, who had sat with Alina for 11 hours and kept a basement room for 15 years and cried while reading his mother's letters in a London flat and asked instead of arranged, most of the time, and was learning to do it more. "It's not the best chapter," I said. He looked at me. "It's the beginning of the best part," I said. "The chapter where you know what you're building and who you're building it with, and the next thing isn't shaped by the thing you were building against. That's not a chapter. That's the book." He was very still. "The book," he said. "The book," I said. "You've been in the prologue. Welcome to the actual story." The real smile, the full one, the one I would keep as long as I had a memory to keep it in. He crossed the room. He held my face in his hands, the gesture that was his language, that he'd stopped managing and started simply doing, and looked at me with everything he had. All of it. The 4 years and the 15 years and the wrong floor and the right room and Alina and the crest and London and the stone fragment from Portobello and the piece of red hook glass on the shelf. "The book," he said. "Yes," I said. He kissed me. In the library, with the drawing on the wall and the collected things on the shelf, and the city enormous outside the window. The book. Already writing itself. Chapter 7. What Alina knows about endings. Elena, the same evening. She had been thinking about endings for 18 months. This was not a morbid preoccupation. It was, she had decided, the appropriate preoccupation of someone who had been given an extended tour of the territory adjacent to their own ending, and had returned from it with the specific perspective of someone who had been very close to the door and had decided to step back. The perspective was clarifying. This was the thing about proximity to one's own ending that people who had not been there could not quite understand. It was not only frightening. It was also, in the specific way of things that are forced into their true scale, clarifying. The unimportant things revealed themselves as unimportant. The important things revealed themselves as important. The people who mattered became very specifically clear. She was in her studio on the 17th floor, her studio now, fully and completely, since the month after her full remission when she had asked Adrian if she could stay. Not in the protected and hidden sense that had been the arrangement for 8 months. Simply stay. In this room. As a resident of this building, properly, with her name on a lease and a legal tenancy, and all the ordinary apparatus of someone who lived somewhere by choice rather than necessity. He had said yes before she'd finished the sentence. She was painting. Something new, not the crest, which was complete, delivered, hung now in the building's atrium for the foundation launch. Something new, which was always the thing after the best work. The question of what next, the uncertainty of the blank canvas, the specific terror and freedom of a new beginning. She thought about the painting of Violet she'd finished months ago and given to her. Violet had put it in the library, not prominently, not as a statement, but in the specific position on the east wall where the morning light hit it in a way that made the face in it come alive at a specific hour each day. Alina had been in the library once when the morning light was doing that, and had stood looking at her own work illuminated by the kind of light she'd been thinking about for months, and had felt the specific satisfaction of something placed correctly. She thought about the portrait of Adrian she was now beginning. Not the portrait she'd imagined making when she first came back to painting, the one that would have been about the history, the complexity, the difficult layers. This was different. This was the portrait of a man who had set down something very heavy and was still adjusting to the lightness, the portrait of someone in transition between who they were and who they were becoming. It was the most interesting portrait she'd ever attempted. Her phone buzzed. A text from Violet, dinner, all 3 of us. Adrian says he'll cook. I told him I'm not responsible for the results. Alina looked at the text, then at the blank canvas, then back at the text. She typed, I will be there. Tell him the risotto needs more time than he thinks. 3 dots. Then he says he knows. He says you always say that. He says it comes out right. She smiled. The private smile, the one she didn't manage. She put down the brush. She covered the canvas. She went upstairs. The kitchen was already warm. He had started early, which was characteristic, and the smell of the beginning of something good was already in the air. Violet was on the counter in her position, sketchbook open, contributing opinions that he was receiving with the specific quality of attention that meant he was actually considering them. They both looked up when she came in. The look between the 3 of them, the 3 of them in this kitchen, in this building, after everything, was not a dramatic thing. It did not need to be. It was simply the recognition of people who know each other, who have been through something together, who have arrived at the other side of it still in the same room. He's overcooking the onions, Alina said. He's not, Violet said. I've been monitoring. She has been monitoring, Adrian confirmed, with the expression of someone who has accepted that his kitchen will, going forward, be a collaborative space. Aggressively. Good, Alina said. She pulled out a stool. She sat. What are we celebrating? The installation, Violet said. London. The foundation launch, Adrian said. September, Alina said. We are celebrating September. They looked at her. September is worth celebrating, she said. Every September, without specific reason, because it exists and we are in it. A pause, then Violet said, fair. Very fair, Adrian said. He opened wine. Alina took her glass. Violet took hers. The kitchen was warm and the city was outside the window doing its September things, and the risotto was going to take exactly as long as it needed to take, and the 3 of them were going to sit in this kitchen and eat it together. Alina thought, I was going to die. I was very close to dying. And instead I am here, on a Friday evening in September, in a kitchen in New York, with the two people who matter most to me, celebrating nothing in particular and everything in general. She thought, this is the other side of it. This is what the door looked like from the outside. She thought, it looks like this, exactly this. She raised her glass. To September, she said. To September, they said. They drank. The city went on outside. The building held them. Somewhere in the atrium below, the installation was doing what it did, the light through the old glass, the salvaged beams from the crest, the permanent record of everything that had survived. Above it, the painting of the crest's best room, the small figure at the windows, the woman who had designed the light and been right about it outlasting her. Above that, 3 people in a kitchen making dinner. The story going on. End of part 9. Cliffhanger. The foundation launch was scheduled for October 15th. 300 invitations. The atrium. Alina's painting beside the installation. The full public record of everything the Marguerite Kane Foundation would do. On the morning of October 12th, 3 days before the launch, Violet found Adrian in the basement archive. Not in the documented room, in the room beside it. The one she hadn't known existed. He was standing in front of a single framed item on the wall. Not a document, not a photograph. A painting, small, oil-on panel. A woman in a studio, surrounded by architectural drawings, looking at the light through a window. On the back of the panel, in a handwriting she did not recognize. Marguerite, 1991. Painted by Richard Cresswell. The only honest thing I ever made.